Chapter 1. The fateful morning, July 20th, 1969. High above the moon, inside the cramped, fragile cockpit of the lunar module Eagle, there is no sense of morning or night. There is only the gray, pockmarked desolation of the lunar surface rushing up to meet them, and the cold, analytical chatter of men working at the very edge of human experience. Two men, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, are strapped into a machine that is part spaceship, part helicopter. A delicate insect-like craft designed for one purpose only, to land on another world. They are 4 days from home, 250,000 miles away from every human being who has ever lived, save for their lone companion Michael Collins, orbiting 60 miles above them in the command module Columbia. For the past 12 minutes, they have been in a state of controlled freefall, a powered descent that has been simulated 1,000 times on Earth, but has never before been attempted for real. The world is holding its breath. An estimated 650 million people are watching grainy, ghost-like images, listening to the crackle of a radio signal that has crossed the void of space. They are listening to the heartbeat of the mission, and that heartbeat is becoming dangerously erratic. Inside the Eagle, the air is thick with the hum of electronics and the low hiss of oxygen. Through his triangular window, Commander Neil Armstrong can see the target landing zone in the Sea of Tranquility. But the reality does not match the pristine maps he has memorized. The Eagle's automated guidance system is taking them straight into a crater, a field of boulders the size of automobiles that would shred their delicate craft and extinguish their lives in a silent, airless tomb. This was not in the plan. The calm, metronomic voice of Mission Control in Houston, Texas, crackles in their headsets. But inside the cockpit, a new sound has pierced the concentration, a shrill, insistent alarm. It is accompanied by a flashing yellow light, and a cryptic code on the small computer display. 1202, program alarm. Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin has ever seen it before in simulation. They have no idea what it means. Is the computer failing? Is the guidance system about to send them tumbling into the lunar dust? Aldrin's voice, sharp with urgency, cuts through the static. Program alarm. It's a 1202. Armstrong's gaze remains fixed on the approaching terrain, his hand hovering over the attitude controller, the stick that gives him manual control of the Eagle. He is the commander. He is the pilot. The final decision rests with him. On Earth, in the cavernous mission control room, a wave of controlled panic ripples through the rows of engineers. Flight Director Gene Kranz, his signature flat-top haircut and steely gaze a fixture of authority, scans his team. His vest, sewn by his wife, is a symbol of mission readiness, but no vest could prepare them for this. The 1202 alarm. What is it? A young guidance officer, 26-year-old Steve Bales, has his finger on the abort button. One word from him, and the mission is over. The Eagle will jettison its landing stage and fire its ascent engine, rocketing Armstrong and Aldrin back to orbit, back to safety. It would be a bitter failure, a victory for the Soviet Union, a dream deferred for a generation. The world would see America falter at the final hurdle. Bales has seconds to make a call that will define history. He has to trust his training, his simulations, his team. His voice, though young, rings with a confidence he may not entirely feel. We're go on that alarm. Back in the Eagle, the alarm shrieks again. 1202, then another. 1201. Aldrin is calling out altitude and velocity, a human backup to a machine that seems to be screaming for help. 750 feet, coming down at 23. 700 feet, 21 down. Armstrong makes his decision. The computer is compromised, and the landing site is lethal. He takes control. His heart rate, which had been a steady 75 beats per minute, spikes to 150. "Okay, Houston," he says. His voice unnervingly calm, a pilot's voice. "I'm taking over." He nudges the controller and the Eagle pitches forward, its thrusters firing in short, sharp bursts. He is now flying the lander like a helicopter, skimming over the boulder field, his eyes scanning the alien landscape for a safe harbor. He is burning fuel. Precious fuel. The fuel that is their only ticket back to orbit, their only way home. The mission rules are clear. At 60 seconds of fuel remaining, he must make a choice, land or abort. In Houston, the voice of the CADCOM, Charlie Duke, becomes the only link between Earth and the Eagle. His calm southern drawl belies the tension gripping the room. "Eagle, looking great. Your go." But a new voice enters the loop, the flight dynamics officer reporting on the fuel status. It is a countdown to oblivion. 60 seconds. 60 seconds of fuel left. Armstrong is still flying, still searching. The boulders give way to a smoother patch, a place just big enough, but it's farther than planned. More fuel, more time. Aldrin's voice is a steady metronome of data. 40 feet, down 2.5, picking up some dust. Outside, the descent engine is kicking up the fine charcoal-gray lunar soil, a swirling cloud that obscures the ground. Armstrong can no longer see the surface clearly. He is landing blind, relying on instruments, instinct, and the feel of the machine. The countdown continues from Houston, a stark reminder of their mortality. 30 seconds. The room in Houston is silent. Men are chewing on cigars that have long gone out. Fists are clenched. They can only listen. They are passengers on this journey now, helpless spectators, to the drama unfolding 250,000 miles away. 30 seconds of fuel is the absolute red line, the point of no return. If he does not land now, he will not have enough fuel to safely abort. He will be committed. The Eagle will either land or it will crash. The choice has been made for him. This is it. The culmination of a decade of work, the lives of 300,000 people, the prestige of a nation, the dream of a generation. It all comes down to these final, terrifying moments. The world listens to the silence, to the faint crackle of static from a place beyond imagination, waiting for a verdict from the heavens. The worst was yet to come. Chapter 2. A beep heard round the world. October 4th, 1957. It began not with a roar, but with a beep. A simple, rhythmic, electronic pulse broadcast from the cold, dark vacuum of space. On that Friday evening, as Americans settled into the comfortable prosperity of the post-war era, a new and unwelcome star appeared in the twilight sky. It was a polished metal sphere just 23 inches in diameter, with 4 spidery antennae trailing behind it. It weighed 184 pounds. It was called Sputnik, the Russian word for traveling companion, and it was circling the Earth every 96 minutes, broadcasting its tiny, triumphant signal to anyone with a radio receiver to hear it. The sound was mesmerizing. Beep, beep, beep. It was the sound of a new age dawning, and for the United States of America, it was the sound of profound, soul-shaking fear. The launch, from the secret Tyuratam Cosmodrome in the desolate steppes of Kazakhstan, had caught the world completely by surprise. While American rocket programs like Vanguard were suffering embarrassing and highly public failures, exploding on the launch pad in balls of fire, the secretive and underestimated Soviet Union had quietly, methodically, achieved the impossible. They had placed an artificial satellite into orbit. The technological and psychological impact was immediate and devastating. This was not merely a scientific achievement. This was a statement of power. This was the Cold War, a global struggle for ideological, political, and military supremacy, being elevated to a new, terrifying dimension, the heavens themselves. If the Soviets could put a satellite into orbit, the logic went, they could put a nuclear warhead into orbit. They could drop a bomb on Washington, D.C. or New York City, or any American town, with impunity, from a place no one could reach. The nation's oceans, which had protected it for nearly 2 centuries, were suddenly irrelevant. The sky was no longer a sanctuary. It was a new high ground, and America had just lost it. The reaction was a mixture of disbelief, humiliation, and outright panic. Senate Majority Leader Lyndon B. Johnson, a man whose political instincts were second to none, captured the mood of dread. He spoke of the Soviets as masters of a new domain, a domain America had neglected. Soon, he warned, they will be dropping bombs on us from space like kids dropping rocks onto cars from freeway overpasses. The media fanned the flames of this new anxiety. Newspapers ran headlines that spoke of a red moon and a technological Pearl Harbor. Life magazine published an article titled "Arguing the Case for Being Panicked," which concluded that panic was, in fact, the appropriate response. Citizens flocked to observatories, hoping to catch a glimpse of the tiny man-made star as it streaked across the American heartland, a silent, glittering symbol of Soviet prowess. In the White House, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a man who had commanded the Allied forces in Europe and understood military power better than anyone, tried to project an aura of calm. He publicly downplayed the significance of Sputnik, dismissing it as one small ball in the air. He knew from secret U-2 spy plane reconnaissance that the so-called missile gap with the Soviets was not as dire as the public feared, but the public did not have access to classified intelligence. They had the headlines, the political rhetoric, and the unsettling beep, beep, beep on their radios. The pressure to act was immense. Eisenhower, a fiscal conservative, had been reluctant to pour massive government funds into a space program he viewed as a costly stunt. But Sputnik changed the political calculus entirely. America's prestige, its technological leadership, its very security, seemed to be at stake. The nation's confidence was shattered. How could this have happened? How could the industrious, innovative, victorious United States have been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by a totalitarian regime? The soul-searching began immediately. A consensus emerged that the American education system had grown soft, that it was failing to produce the scientists and engineers needed to compete. A new urgency gripped the country. The National Defense Education Act was passed, pouring billions of dollars into science, mathematics, and foreign language education. A generation of young Americans would be inspired and pushed toward careers in science and technology. The seeds of the Apollo generation were being sown in the fertile ground of national anxiety. But education was a long-term solution. A more immediate response was needed. The various competing military space programs, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, were seen as inefficient and duplicative. A new, unified civilian agency was required, one that could focus the nation's scientific and industrial might on a single goal: catching up to the Soviets. On July 29, 1958, less than a year after Sputnik's launch, President Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act into law. From the ashes of the old National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, a new organization was born: the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Its mission was clear, if unstated: to beat the Russians in space. The race had begun. America was starting from behind, and the Soviets were not waiting. Just 1 month after Sputnik 1, they launched Sputnik 2, a much larger satellite carrying a living passenger, a stray dog from the streets of Moscow named Laika. While the mission was a tragic one-way trip for the dog, it was another stunning propaganda victory. The Soviets could launch a living creature into orbit. America was still struggling to get a grapefruit-sized satellite off the ground. Finally, on January 31, 1958, after the Navy's Vanguard rocket had failed spectacularly, the Army's rocket team, led by a controversial figure named Wernher von Braun, succeeded. Their Jupiter C rocket launched Explorer 1, America's first satellite, into orbit. It was a small victory, a moment of national relief, but Explorer 1 weighed just 31 pounds, a fraction of the size of the Soviet Sputniks, and it carried a scientific instrument package that made a landmark discovery: the Van Allen radiation belts surrounding the Earth. But this scientific triumph was largely lost in the political noise. The message was clear: America was in the game, but it was still losing. The beep of Sputnik had awakened a sleeping giant. It had ignited a fire of competition that would burn for more than a decade. It had set in motion a chain of events that would demand unprecedented resources, genius, and courage. It had started a contest not of armies or ideologies in the abstract, but of rockets, capsules, and human beings. The finish line was not a place on Earth, but a destination that had, until now, belonged only to poets and dreamers. The Soviets had taken the lead, and their next move would be even more audacious. They would not be content with sending satellites and dogs into the heavens. They were preparing to send a man, and the world had no idea how far ahead they truly were. Chapter 3. The First Heavens. April 12, 1961. The Baikonur Cosmodrome, Kazakhstan. A young man, just 27 years old, stands at the base of a colossal rocket. He is a senior lieutenant in the Soviet Air Force, the son of a carpenter and a dairy farmer, with a smile that could charm the world. His name is Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin. He is about to become the most famous human being on the planet. He wears a bulky orange flight suit and a white helmet with the letters CCCP painted in bold red. As he walks toward the gantry, he pauses. He asks the bus driver to stop, steps out onto the dusty step, and relieves himself on the right rear tire of the bus. It is a moment of raw, unplanned humanity that will become a sacred ritual for every cosmonaut who follows him to that launch pad. He is then sealed inside a tiny spherical capsule perched atop a modified R-7 Semyorka intercontinental ballistic missile, the same rocket design that had launched Sputnik. The capsule is called Vostok 1. Through a small porthole he can see the vast empty landscape. He is calm. He is ready. He famously utters a simple, informal word that captures the spirit of the moment. Poyakali. Let's go. The rocket ignites. A torrent of fire and thunder tears at the Kazakh plains. Inside the capsule, Gagarin is pressed back into his seat by the crushing force of acceleration, the G-forces building to a nearly unbearable level. He is a passenger on a controlled explosion, a human cannonball aimed at the sky. For years, the United States had been working feverishly on its own manned spaceflight program, Project Mercury. 7 astronauts, all military test pilots, had been selected. They were heroes, the embodiment of American courage and competence. Their faces graced the covers of magazines. They were the right stuff, but they were still on the ground. The Soviet program, by contrast, was shrouded in absolute secrecy. The world knew nothing of their cosmonauts, their rockets, or their plans. The West could only watch the skies and wait for the next surprise. And on April 12, 1961, the surprise came. Radio monitors in the West picked up the signals, a human voice speaking Russian from orbit. The news flashed across the globe like lightning. The Soviet Union had done it again. They had sent the first man into space. Yuri Gagarin completed a single orbit of the Earth, a journey of 108 minutes that forever changed humanity's relationship with the cosmos. He saw the world not as a patchwork of nations and conflicts, but as a single, beautiful, fragile sphere. From the darkness of space, he radioed back his impressions. The Earth is blue. How wonderful. It is amazing. The propaganda value of his flight was immeasurable. The son of peasants, a product of the communist system, had become the first celestial traveler. Premier Nikita Khrushchev boasted that Gagarin's flight was a testament to the superiority of communism, to the world, and especially to the United States. It was another stunning, humiliating blow. America's first manned flight was still weeks away, and when it did happen, on May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard's flight in the Freedom 7 capsule was a mere suborbital hop, a 15-minute ride up and down, a pale imitation of Gagarin's full orbit. While Shepard was hailed as a hero at home, the world saw the reality. The Soviets were not just leading the space race, they were winning it decisively, and they did not let up. The Vostok program continued to rack up an astonishing series of firsts. In August 1961, German Titov spent a full day in orbit, proving that humans could endure prolonged periods of weightlessness. In 1962, they launched 2 Vostok capsules in close succession, the first dual-manned flight. In June 1963, they sent the first woman into space, Valentina Tereshkova, a former textile factory worker. Each flight was a new headline, a new demonstration of Soviet dominance. America's Project Mercury, for all its heroism, seemed to be perpetually playing catch-up. John Glenn's 3-orbit flight in February 1962 was a moment of immense national pride, a sign that America was finally on the board, but the Soviets always seemed to be one step ahead. The pressure inside NASA was immense. The early American rockets, particularly the Navy's Vanguard, became a national joke, often nicknamed Kaputnik, or Flopnik, as they exploded on the launch pad. Even the more reliable Atlas rockets used for Project Mercury were prone to failure. Every time an astronaut strapped himself into a Mercury capsule, he knew there was a significant chance he would not survive the launch. Behind the Iron Curtain, the Soviet triumphs were presented as a seamless, inevitable march of progress, but the reality was far more dangerous and chaotic. On March 18, 1965, the Soviets achieved another spectacular first. Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, tethered to his Voskhod 2 spacecraft, opened the hatch and floated out into the void. He became the first human to walk in space. The images were breathtaking. A man, seemingly free, swimming in the cosmos, with the Earth turning silently below. It was a poetic, powerful moment. But behind the poetry was a near-fatal disaster. In the vacuum of space, Leonov's spacesuit ballooned. It became so stiff and inflated that he could not bend his joints. He was unable to re-enter the small airlock. His oxygen was running low, his body temperature was soaring. In a desperate, unscripted gamble, he opened a valve on his suit, leading precious air out into space, reducing the pressure to a dangerous level. He risked the bends, the same deadly condition that afflicts deep-sea divers who surface too quickly. Finally, after a terrifying struggle, he managed to squeeze himself back into the airlock headfirst, a violation of all procedures. His ordeal was not over. The spacecraft's automated re-entry system failed. He and his crewmate, Pavel Belayev, were forced to fire the re-entry rockets manually. They overshot their landing zone by hundreds of miles, coming down deep in the remote, snow-covered Ural Mountains, a region populated by wolves and bears. They spent 2 freezing nights huddled in their capsule, awaiting rescue. The world saw only the triumph of the first spacewalk. The terrifying reality was hidden, a state secret. This was the nature of the race. The Soviets projected an image of effortless superiority, while NASA's struggles and failures often played out on live television. For the American public and its political leaders, it seemed as if the United States was technologically and perhaps even culturally inferior. The string of Soviet firsts created a crisis of confidence that reached the highest office in the land. A young new president, John F. Kennedy, had come to power. He had campaigned on a promise to get the country moving again. But just 3 months into his presidency, he was confronted with the humiliation of Gagarin's flight, followed swiftly by the disastrous failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. America looked weak, incompetent. Kennedy knew he needed a victory. He needed a project so grand, so audacious, that it would leapfrog the Soviets entirely. It would not be enough to catch up. America had to jump ahead, to change the rules of the game. He turned to his advisors, including his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, and the administrator of NASA, James Webb. He asked them a simple, direct question: is there any space program which promises dramatic results in which we could win? The answer that came back would define the decade, and perhaps the century. It was a goal so difficult, so far beyond existing capabilities, that it seemed like science fiction. But it had one crucial advantage: it was a race the Soviets had not yet publicly declared they were running. It was a finish line so distant that America might just have enough time to get there first. The goal was the moon, and getting there would require men of extraordinary vision and talent on both sides of the world. Chapter 4. The Challenger and the Chief Designer. The space race was not merely a contest of machines. It was a deeply personal duel between two brilliant, obsessive, and powerful men. One was a public figure, a charismatic aristocrat of science who became the handsome face of America's space program. The other was a ghost, a phantom known only by a title, his name and face a closely guarded state secret, his life a testament to survival and genius forged in the crucible of Stalin's terror. On one side stood Werner von Braun, born into German nobility. Von Braun was a visionary from a young age, captivated by the dream of spaceflight, after reading the works of pioneers like Hermann Oberth. He was brilliant, charming, and driven by a singular ambition to build rockets that would carry humanity to the stars. But to build his rockets, he needed resources, and in the 1930s, the only entity in Germany with the resources he needed was the military. He joined the Nazi Party and became the technical director of the Peenemünde Army Research Center. There, he and his team developed the V-2, the world's first long-range ballistic missile. It was a technological marvel, a machine that flew at supersonic speeds to the edge of space before descending to deliver a ton of explosives on cities like London and Antwerp. The V-2 was built by slave labor from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp, where thousands of prisoners died from starvation, disease, and brutal working conditions. Von Braun's exact role and culpability in these atrocities have been debated by historians for decades. He would later claim he was aware of the conditions, but was powerless to change them, a prisoner of his own Faustian bargain. He insisted his only goal was space travel, and he had to work within the political system available to him. As the war ended, von Braun made a calculated decision. He orchestrated the surrender of himself and his top scientists to the advancing American forces, bringing with them a treasure trove of technical documents and rocket parts. Under a secret program called Operation Paperclip, he and his German team were brought to the United States, their pasts sanitized, and put to work for the U.S. Army at Fort Bliss, Texas, and later at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. In Huntsville, von Braun became a public figure. He was a tireless advocate for space exploration, writing articles for popular magazines like Collier's, and working with Walt Disney on a series of television specials that introduced the American public to the dream of spaceflight. He was a natural communicator, able to explain complex engineering concepts in simple, inspiring terms. To many, he was a hero, the man who would take America to the moon. But to others, he was a man with a dark past, a moral compromise at the heart of the nation's noble quest. He was the indispensable man, the only person with the experience to build the colossal rockets NASA would need, and so America made its own bargain. On the other side of the world, in the Soviet Union, was von Braun's unseen rival. His name was Sergei Pavlovich Korolev. While von Braun was a baron, Korolev was the son of a teacher. While von Braun worked in state-of-the-art facilities, Korolev spent his formative years in hell. A brilliant aeronautical engineer in his youth, Korolev was arrested in 1938 during Stalin's Great Purge. He was tortured, forced to sign a false confession, and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in the brutal Kolyma gold mines of Siberia, one of the deadliest camps in the Gulag. He lost most of his teeth to scurvy, suffered a broken jaw, and nearly died from the horrific conditions. He was saved from certain death only when a powerful figure in the aviation industry intervened, having him transferred to a Sharashka, a special prison for scientists and engineers who were forced to work on military projects. After the war, he was released and rehabilitated. His record cleared, but the experience left him with a permanent sense of urgency, a relentless, almost brutal drive to succeed. He had seen the fragility of life and the capricious nature of power. He had no time to waste. Korolev became the head of the Soviet rocketry program, but his identity was a state secret. To the public and even to many within the program, he was known only as the chief designer. His name was never mentioned in the press. His face was never shown. This was done partly for security, but also because the Soviet system promoted the idea that great achievements were the result of the collective, not the individual. The chief designer was the driving force behind every major Soviet space triumph: Sputnik, Laika, Gagarin's flight, Leonov's spacewalk. He was a master organizer, a brilliant engineer, and a ruthless taskmaster. He inspired both fierce loyalty and intense fear in those who worked for him. He would scream at engineers one moment and embrace them the next. He worked himself to the point of exhaustion, fueled by coffee and cigarettes, driven by a deep patriotism and an all-consuming desire to beat the Americans. Unlike the unified civilian structure of NASA, Korolev had to navigate a labyrinth of competing design bureaus and political infighting. He was in constant conflict with rivals like Valentin Glushko, the premier engine designer, and Vladimir Chelomey, a favorite of Premier Khrushchev. This internal competition wasted precious resources and time, a hidden weakness in the seemingly monolithic Soviet program. The two men, von Braun and Korolev, were shadows of each other. Both were visionaries obsessed with spaceflight. Both were master engineers and program managers. Von Braun was the polished public relations man. Korolev was the invisible puppet master. Von Braun had the vast industrial and financial resources of the United States at his disposal, managed through the relatively transparent bureaucracy of NASA. Korolev had to fight for every scrap of funding and political support, often relying on his personal relationship with the country's leader. Their central challenge was the same: to build a rocket powerful enough to send human beings to the moon and bring them back safely. Von Braun's answer was the Saturn V. It would be the most powerful machine ever built by humanity, a 36-story behemoth of engineering perfection, developed in the open, with its progress tracked by the world's media. Korolev's answer was the N-1 rocket. It was even more ambitious in some ways than the Saturn V, but it was plagued by the internal rivalries and lack of resources that defined the Soviet system. Glushko, the engine designer, refused to build the large, powerful engines Korolev needed. Forced to compromise, Korolev designed the N-1's first stage to be powered by a complex cluster of 30 smaller engines. It was a design of nightmarish complexity, a desperate gamble born of political necessity. The fate of the space race would ultimately rest on the shoulders of these two men and the machines they created. One worked in the bright glare of public scrutiny, his past a constant whispered shadow. The other worked in total secrecy, a national hero whose name was unknown, his health slowly failing from the damage inflicted by the Gulag. They were the generals in a new kind of war, a war of intellect, ambition, and fire, and only one of them could win. Chapter 5. We Choose to Go to the Moon. May 25, 1961. Washington, D.C. A young president stands before a special joint session of Congress. John F. Kennedy is just over 4 months into his presidency, and it has been a trial by fire. The humiliation of Yuri Gagarin's orbital flight is still fresh. The stench of failure from the CIA-backed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba hangs heavy in the air. The United States appears to be losing the Cold War on every front. Kennedy needs to change the narrative. He needs a bold stroke, a challenge so audacious it will galvanize the nation and demonstrate American strength and resolve to the world. He has found his challenge, in a speech that will echo through history. He lays out his vision not as a request, but as a national imperative. His voice is firm, his language clear and direct. I believe, he declares, that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind, or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. It was a breathtaking gamble. At the time Kennedy made this speech, the United States had a total of 15 minutes of manned spaceflight experience, from Alan Shepard's suborbital hop. The technology to go to the moon did not exist. The rockets, the spacecraft, the navigation systems, the computers, the spacesuits, none of it was invented yet. No one knew if humans could even survive for the week or more it would take to travel to the moon and back. The challenges were monumental, the unknowns terrifying. The estimated cost was astronomical, somewhere between $20 and $40 billion, a staggering sum for a nation facing numerous domestic and international problems. But the goal was not primarily scientific. It was geopolitical. It was a symbolic battleground in the Cold War. The moon was a finish line so distant, so technically demanding, that it gave America a chance to erase the Soviet lead and pull ahead. It was a race America could win. Kennedy himself was not a space enthusiast in the way von Braun was. He was a pragmatist, a cold warrior. He saw the Apollo program, as it would be named, as a powerful tool of foreign policy. In a private meeting with NASA Administrator James Webb, Kennedy was blunt. Everything that we do ought to be tied into getting to the moon ahead of the Russians. I'm not that interested in space. The goal was set. The gauntlet was thrown down. Now NASA had to figure out how to do it. On September 12, 1962, at Rice University in Houston, Texas, Kennedy delivered another, more famous speech to sell this monumental undertaking to a skeptical public. Standing in the university's football stadium on a sweltering day, he framed the quest not as a burden, but as a challenge worthy of a great nation. He acknowledged the immense difficulty, and in doing so he transformed it into a measure of American character. "We choose to go to the moon," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with conviction. "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." The rhetoric was soaring, the reality on the ground was a messy, contentious engineering debate. How exactly do you go to the moon? 3 main methods, or modes, were proposed. The first was direct descent. This was the brute force approach. A single, colossal rocket, dubbed the Nova, would launch a massive spacecraft directly to the moon's surface. The entire ship would land, and then the entire ship would take off and fly back to Earth. It was simple in concept, but the rocket required would have been unimaginably huge, far larger even than the Saturn V, and likely impossible to build within the decade. The second option was Earth Orbit Rendezvous, or EOR. This plan involved launching the components of the lunar spacecraft into orbit around the Earth with multiple rockets, assembling them in space, and then heading to the moon. This avoided the need for a giant Nova rocket, but it introduced the enormous complexity and risk of orbital rendezvous and construction, something that had never been done before. The third option was the dark horse, the underdog. It was called Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, or LUOR. This plan involved sending a single large rocket, the Saturn V, to the moon. The main spacecraft, the mothership, would go into orbit around the moon. A second, smaller craft, a dedicated lander, would then detach, descend to the surface, and later, ascend back to the mothership for the journey home. The advantages of LUOR were immense. The lander could be designed to be extremely lightweight, as it only ever had to fly in the vacuum of space and the low gravity of the moon. This meant the entire system could be launched by a single, manageable, though still gigantic rocket, but the risks were terrifying. It required a successful rendezvous and docking not in the relative safety of Earth orbit, but 250,000 miles from home. If the lander's ascent engine failed to fire, or if the two ships could not find each other and dock, the astronauts on the lunar surface would be stranded, left to die in the most desolate place imaginable, their fate broadcast to a horrified world. Most of the senior leadership at NASA, including Wernher von Braun, initially hated the Allure idea. They saw it as unacceptably risky, an intricate dance of celestial mechanics, where a single misstep meant death. They favored the more conservative direct descent, or EOR, approaches. But a small group of engineers, led by a brilliant, stubborn, and relatively unknown figure at the Langley Research Center, named John Hobart, championed LOR with an almost religious fervor. Hobart saw that LOR was not just the best way. He believed it was the only way to meet Kennedy's deadline. He wrote papers, gave presentations, and argued his case to anyone who would listen. When he was ignored by the NASA hierarchy, he took an immense career risk. He went outside the chain of command and wrote a 9-page letter directly to Robert Semmons, a top NASA administrator. "Do we want to go to the moon or not?" Hobart wrote, his frustration palpable. Why is Nova, with its ponderous size, being given such official emphasis? His passionate, data-driven advocacy began to turn the tide. Slowly, methodically, the engineering logic of LOR won over the skeptics. Even von Braun, initially one of its staunchest opponents, eventually came around, recognizing the elegant efficiency of the plan. In the summer of 1962, NASA officially made its decision. It would be Lunar Orbit Rendezvous. It was the most critical decision of the entire Apollo program, a choice that set the architectural blueprint for the journey to the moon. It was a decision that traded the brute force of larger rockets for the precision and finesse of orbital mechanics. It was a bet on the skill of the pilots and the reliability of the machines. It was a choice that defined the shape of the command module, the iconic cone that would carry the crew, and the strange, spindly form of the lunar module, the craft that would make the final descent. The path was now clear. The challenge, laid down by a president for reasons of state, was now in the hands of the engineers. They had their mission, they had their architecture. Now they had to build it, and they had to learn to fly it, in an environment more unforgiving than any human had ever known. Chapter 6. Trial by Fire. Before America could run to the moon, it first had to learn how to walk in space. The gap between the single-man Mercury capsules and the 3-man Apollo spacecraft was a chasm of complexity. To bridge it, NASA created Project Gemini. Named for the twins of the Zodiac, Gemini was a 2-man spacecraft, a bigger, more capable version of the Mercury capsule. Its mission was not to break records for distance or duration, but to master the critical techniques that would be essential for a lunar mission: long-duration flight, rendezvous, docking, and extravehicular activity or EVA, the spacewalk. Gemini was the unsung workhorse of the space race. Over a period of 20 months, from 1965 to 1966, NASA flew 10 manned Gemini missions, a relentless pace that pushed astronauts and ground crews to their limits. It was in Gemini that America truly came of age in space. On Gemini 4, Ed White became the first American to walk in space. While the Soviets' Alexei Leonov had done it first, White's EVA was a moment of pure infectious joy. For 23 minutes, he floated at the end of a tether, a small gas-powered maneuvering gun in his hand, twisting and turning against the black backdrop of space. He was so euphoric that he had to be ordered back into the spacecraft. "It's the saddest moment of my life," he lamented as he returned to the hatch. Gemini 5, crewed by Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad, stayed in orbit for 8 days, proving that humans could withstand a trip to the moon and back. On Gemini 6 and 7, 2 spacecraft, with 4 astronauts, performed the first-ever space rendezvous, flying in perfect formation just feet apart. It was a stunning display of precision piloting. Then on Gemini 8, Neil Armstrong, a quiet, brilliant engineering test pilot, performed the first-ever docking, linking his spacecraft with an unmanned Agena target vehicle. But moments after the triumph of docking, disaster struck. A stuck thruster on the Gemini spacecraft sent the combined vehicles into a violent, uncontrollable spin. The spin rate increased to 1 revolution per second, blurring the astronauts' vision and threatening to knock them unconscious. Displaying the icy calm that would later define him, Armstrong undocked from the Agena and used the capsule's re-entry control thrusters to stabilize the craft, saving the mission and their lives. It was a terrifyingly close call, a reminder of the unforgiving nature of space. Gemini taught NASA invaluable lessons. It built a cadre of experienced astronauts and a seasoned team of flight controllers. It proved the concepts of rendezvous and docking, the cornerstones of the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous Plan. By the end of 1966, as Gemini 12 splashed down in the Atlantic, NASA was confident. They were ready for the next giant leap. They were ready for Apollo. The Apollo spacecraft was a quantum leap in technology. It consisted of 2 main components: the command module, a cone-shaped capsule that would serve as the crew's home for the journey, and the service module, a cylinder containing the main engine, fuel, and life support systems. Later, the third component, the lunar module, would be added. But the first mission, Apollo 1, was designed to be a simple Earth orbit test of the new command and service modules. The crew selected for this historic first flight was a veteran team. The commander was Virgil Gus Grissom, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, a tough, no-nonsense engineer. The senior pilot was Ed White, the man who had so joyfully walked in space during Gemini 4. The pilot was Roger Chaffee, a rookie astronaut, highly regarded by his peers. They were the best of the best. January 27, 1967. Launch Complex 34 at Cape Kennedy, Florida. The gleaming white Saturn IB rocket stands ready, the Apollo 1 capsule perched on its top. The mission is still weeks from launch, but today, the crew is conducting a plugs-out test, a full-scale dress rehearsal on the launch pad, simulating the countdown under the spacecraft's own internal power. Grissom, White, and Chaffee are sealed inside the capsule. The atmosphere inside is not the normal air we breathe. It is 100% pure oxygen, pressurized to 16 pounds per square inch, slightly above normal atmospheric pressure. This pure oxygen environment was chosen because it was lightweight. It saved the need to carry heavy nitrogen tanks, and it had been used successfully throughout the Mercury and Gemini programs. But it had a hidden fatal flaw. At high pressure, pure oxygen is incredibly flammable. Materials that are normally fire retardant can burn with explosive violence. The cockpit of the Apollo 1 capsule was filled with flammable materials: Velcro strips, nylon nets, polyurethane foam padding. The test is plagued by problems. A strange smell in the oxygen supply. Communications glitches that make it difficult for the crew to talk to the control room. Grissom's voice crackles with frustration. How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings? At 6:31 p.m., a voltage transient, a momentary surge of electricity, is recorded on the data feeds. It likely comes from a frayed wire somewhere in the miles of wiring bundled throughout the capsule. A spark. In the pure oxygen environment, it is like striking a match in a room filled with gasoline vapor. One of the astronauts, it is never determined which one, cries out. A single word, sharp with alarm. Fire. On the mission control audio loop, the word is followed a split second later by another voice. We've got a fire in the cockpit. The fire spreads with unimaginable speed, feeding on the oxygen and the flammable materials. The pressure inside the capsule skyrockets. Roger Chaffee, from his seat, yells into the comm system, "We've got a bad fire. Let's get out. We're burning up." The entire event, from the first cry of fire to the final harrowing transmission, lasts just 17 seconds. The last thing heard is a scream. The intense pressure from the fire ruptures the capsule's inner wall. A sheet of flame and smoke erupts from the side of the spacecraft, engulfing the launch pad. The ground crews, horrified, rush toward the burning capsule, but they are driven back by the intense heat and toxic smoke. The hatch is another fatal design flaw. It is a complex, multi-layered plug door that opens inward. The immense pressure inside the capsule has sealed it shut, making it impossible to open. Even under normal conditions, it would have taken at least 90 seconds for the crew to open it. They never had a chance. By the time the pad crew is finally able to force the hatch open, it is too late. Inside, they find a scene of utter devastation. The 3 astronauts are gone. The dream of the moon, it seems, has died with them on a concrete launch pad in Florida. The Apollo program is shattered. The nation is in shock. The race to the moon has come to a grinding, tragic halt. And in the ensuing investigation, NASA would be forced to confront a terrible truth, that in their rush to beat the Soviets, they had become complacent, and that the magnificent machine they had built was a death trap. The fire was not just an accident, it was a failure of imagination, a failure that would have to be redeemed in the ashes of Launch Complex 34. Chapter 7. The Phoenix, from the Ashes. In the immediate aftermath of the Apollo 1 fire, a profound sense of grief and guilt settled over NASA and the nation. The space program, once a source of immense pride and excitement, was now tainted by tragedy. The 3 astronauts, Grissom, White, and Chaffee, were mourned as national heroes, but behind the public memorials, a brutal and necessary soul-searching had begun. How could this have happened? Who was to blame? The future of the entire Apollo program, and with it, President Kennedy's lunar mandate, hung in the balance. NASA appointed a review board, chaired by Floyd L. Thompson, the director of the Langley Research Center. But Congress, deeply skeptical of NASA's ability to investigate itself, launched its own, more public inquiries. The hearings were grueling. NASA's top managers, including Administrator James Webb and the astronauts' own boss, Deke Slayton, were grilled by senators and congressmen. The astronaut Frank Borman, a man of unimpeachable integrity and a close friend of the fallen crew, served as the astronauts' representative on the review board. He was determined to find the truth, no matter how ugly. The investigation methodically deconstructed the Apollo capsule, piece by piece. The findings were damning. The board identified not a single isolated cause, but a cascade of failures in design, workmanship, and safety procedures. The spark was likely caused by faulty, frayed wiring near the crew's life support systems. The pure oxygen environment, while used before, was found to be unacceptably hazardous on the ground under high pressure. The capsule was filled with flammable materials, from the Velcro that held equipment in place, to the nylon netting designed to catch dropped items. The inward opening hatch was a fatal design flaw, making escape impossible. Perhaps most damning of all was the evidence of shoddy workmanship from the prime contractor, North American Aviation. Technicians found misplaced tools, faulty solder joints, and bundles of wires that had been abraded and stripped of their insulation. In the relentless pressure to meet deadlines, quality control had been compromised. Frank Borman, in his testimony, did not mince words. He spoke of a failure of imagination at both NASA and North American. No one had fully envisioned what could happen if a fire broke out in that oxygen-rich environment on the ground. The program had been afflicted with what one manager would later call go fever, an overwhelming single-minded focus on schedule that overshadowed safety concerns. The Apollo program was stopped dead in its tracks. For 21 months, no American astronaut would fly into space. It was a period of intense reevaluation and redesign. The man put in charge of redesigning the command module was George Low, a brilliant and determined NASA manager. Under his leadership, the spacecraft was reborn. It became the Block II command module. Thousands of changes were made. The pure oxygen atmosphere for ground tests was replaced with a nitrogen-oxygen mix, similar to normal air. Flammable materials were painstakingly removed and replaced with fire-resistant ones. The wiring was completely re-engineered, with every inch protected by insulated sheathing. And most critically, the complex, inward-opening hatch was replaced with a single quick-opening hatch that swung outward. It could be opened in less than 10 seconds. The entire culture of NASA changed. Safety and quality control became the highest priorities. The tragedy had forced a level of discipline and rigor that had been lacking. The agency was building a new, safer spacecraft, but it was losing precious time. While America was grounded, what were the Soviets doing? The answer was a closely guarded secret. The Soviet Union was in fact running its own parallel moon program. Their strategy was different. They planned a series of missions, starting with sending cosmonauts on a circumlunar flight, a loop around the moon, before attempting a landing. The man in charge, the chief designer Sergei Korolev, was pushing his teams as hard as ever. But the Soviet program was about to suffer its own devastating blow. On January 14, 1966, just a year before the Apollo 1 fire, Sergei Korolev died during what was supposed to be routine surgery. His death was a catastrophic loss. He was the visionary, the political operator, the driving force who held the fractious, competing elements of the program together. His identity was finally revealed to the Soviet people upon his death, and he was given a state funeral in the Kremlin wall. With Korolev gone, the internal rivalries he had managed to control erupted into open conflict. His replacement, Vasily Mishin, lacked Korolev's authority and political skill. The Soviet moon effort began to falter. Their hopes now rested on a single piece of hardware, the N-1 rocket. The N-1 was Korolev's answer to von Braun's Saturn V. It was a colossal machine, designed to be even more powerful than its American counterpart. But due to the internal feuds, specifically with engine designer Valentin Glushko, Korolev had been forced to design its first stage with a staggering 30 small engines arranged in a ring. The complexity of the plumbing and the electronics required to make 30 engines fire in perfect harmony was an engineering nightmare. Unlike the Americans, who tested each stage of the Saturn V meticulously on the ground before flight, the Soviets lacked the facilities and the funds to do so. Mishin made the fateful decision to test the entire N-1 rocket system all at once, in an all-up flight test. It was a colossal gamble. On February 21, 1969, the first N-1 rocket stood ready for launch at Baikonur. It was a secret launch. The world was not watching. Moments after liftoff, the engines began to shut down. The massive rocket lost thrust, tilted, and fell back to Earth, exploding in a gigantic fireball. It was a complete failure. On July 3, 1969, just 17 days before Apollo 11 was scheduled to launch for the moon, the Soviets tried again. This time, the result was even more catastrophic. Just seconds after clearing the tower, an engine exploded, triggering a chain reaction. The fully fueled N-1 fell directly back onto the launch pad. The resulting explosion was one of the largest non-nuclear blasts in human history. It completely obliterated the launch complex and everything around it. It was the death knell for the Soviet lunar landing program. These failures were kept secret for decades. To the outside world and to NASA, the Soviet threat still seemed very real. American intelligence had detected the N-1 launch preparations. They knew the Soviets were building a moon rocket. They did not know the extent of the failures. This fear of a Soviet circumlunar mission, of a Soviet crew looping the moon before Apollo was ready, drove NASA to make its own audacious gamble. By the fall of 1968, the redesigned Apollo command module was ready. The Saturn V rocket, after 2 successful unmanned tests, was ready. But the third piece of the puzzle, the lunar module, was behind schedule, plagued by technical problems. A NASA manager, named George Low, the same man who had fixed the command module, came up with a radical idea. The original plan called for the first manned Apollo flight, Apollo 7, to test the command module in Earth orbit. The next flight, Apollo 8, was supposed to test the lunar module in Earth orbit, but the lunar module wasn't ready. Low proposed a daring change of plan. Why not take the ready components, the command module and the Saturn V, and send Apollo 8 all the way to the moon? Not to land, but to orbit. It would be the first time human beings had ever left the gravitational pull of the Earth. It was a high-risk, high-reward mission. It would be a huge leap forward for the American program and a psychological blow to the Soviets. After intense debate, NASA's leadership agreed. The Phoenix was about to rise from the ashes, and it was headed for the moon. Chapter 8. Around the Dark Side. December 21, 1968. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The air is cool and damp in the pre-dawn darkness. A monstrous white column, 363 feet tall, stands bathed in the stark glare of xenon spotlights, venting clouds of cryogenic vapor into the night. This is the Saturn V, the most powerful machine ever created by humanity, and for the first time, there are men sitting on top of it. The crew of Apollo 8, Commander Frank Borman, Command Module Pilot Jim Lovell, and Lunar Module Pilot Bill Anders, are strapped into their couches inside the command module. Their mission is audacious, born of a schedule change and a burning desire to reclaim the lead in the space race. They are about to ride this controlled explosion all the way to the moon. The risks are almost incalculable. This is only the third flight of the Saturn V, and the first with a crew. If the rocket fails, there is no escape. If the single, massive engine on their service module fails to fire to put them into lunar orbit, they will whip past the moon and be lost in the endless void of deep space. If that same engine fails to fire a second time to bring them home, they will be trapped in orbit around the moon forever. A permanent, silent monument over reach. The entire world is watching. The countdown reaches its final seconds. Inside the blockhouse, the launch director's voice is steady. 12, 11, 10, 9, ignition sequence, start. Deep within the base of the Saturn V, 5 F-1 engines, each more powerful than a fleet of battleships, roar to life. The ground shakes for miles around. The sound is not so much heard as it is felt, a physical concussion that vibrates in the chest. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the rocket strains against the massive hold-down arms, building thrust. Then, release. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Saturn V rises with an agonizing slowness, clearing the tower. Inside the capsule, the ride is surprisingly smooth at first, but the noise and vibration build to a deafening, bone-jarring crescendo. The astronauts are pinned to their seats by the mounting G-forces. Borman, a stoic Air Force colonel, feels the immense power of the machine and can only think, I hope this thing holds together. After 2.5 minutes, the first stage separates, and the ride becomes smoother. For 3 days they travel through the blackness of cislunar space. They are the first humans to see the Earth as a whole planet, a grand oasis in the big vastness of space, as Lovell would describe it. They are also the first to experience the disorienting reality of leaving home, of seeing the familiar world shrink to the size of a marble. On Christmas Eve, they arrive at the moon. The moment of truth has come. They swing around to the far side, the side perpetually hidden from Earth. For the next 34 minutes, they will be out of radio contact. Mission Control in Houston can only wait, staring at their screens, hoping that when the spacecraft reappears, it will be in a stable lunar orbit. If the engine burn was too short or too long, or if it didn't happen at all, they will re-emerge on the wrong trajectory. The flight controllers in Houston hold their breath. The seconds tick by. The appointed time for reacquisition of signal comes and goes. Silence. For one long, agonizing minute, there is only static. Has something gone wrong? Are they lost? And then a voice, clear and calm, cuts through the tension. It is Jim Lovell. Houston. Apollo 8, burn complete. A wave of relief and celebration washes over Mission Control. They have done it. For the first time in history, human beings are orbiting another celestial body. For the next 20 hours, the crew of Apollo 8 circles the moon 10 times. They are the first to witness, with their own eyes, the stark alien beauty of the lunar landscape. It is, as Bill Anders describes it, a place of stark beauty, but also one of no color. A beat-up, battered, uninviting place. They are geological scouts, taking photographs and surveying potential landing sites for future missions. But it is on their fourth orbit that the most profound moment of the mission occurs. As they emerge from the far side, Frank Borman is rotating the spacecraft. Suddenly, framed in the window, a breathtaking sight appears. It is the Earth, rising over the lunar horizon, a brilliant, vibrant blue and white sphere, teeming with life, hanging in the black, silent void. It is a moment of pure, unexpected revelation. Bill Anders grabs a Hasselblad camera with color film. He scrambles to capture the image. The photograph he takes will become one of the most famous and influential in human history. It will be called Earthrise. For the first time, humanity sees its home not as a vast, limitless world, but as a small, fragile, and finite island in the cosmos. The image will help to galvanize the nascent environmental movement, becoming a powerful symbol of global unity and the preciousness of life. Later that day, on Christmas Eve, Apollo 8 prepares for a live television broadcast. A quarter of the world's population tunes in. The astronauts show the viewers at home the grainy black and white images of the lunar surface passing below their window, and then they deliver a message. Frank Borman begins, "We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you." One by one, the 3 astronauts read the first 10 verses from the book of Genesis. Bill Anders begins, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." Jim Lovell continues, and Frank Borman concludes, "And God saw that it was good." Borman then signs off with a simple, heartfelt message, and from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you. all of you on the good Earth. It is a moment of profound significance, a message of hope and unity broadcast from lunar orbit, at the end of a year, 1968, that had been torn apart by war, assassination, and civil unrest. The next day, on Christmas morning, comes the second critical engine burn, the burn to take them home. Again, they are on the far side of the moon, out of contact. Again, mission control waits, and again the signal comes through, right on schedule. Apollo 8 is on its way back to Earth. The mission was a triumph. It was a technical masterpiece and a public relations coup. It psychologically broke the back of the Soviet space program. While the Soviets had been the first to orbit the Earth, America was now undeniably the first to the moon. The tide of the space race had turned, decisively. But Apollo 8 was more than a victory in the Cold War. It was a mission of discovery, but the most important discovery was not on the moon. It was the rediscovery of Earth. As Frank Borman would later reflect, we went to explore the moon and what we discovered was the Earth. The path was now clear. The final dress rehearsals, Apollo 9 and Apollo 10, would test the last piece of the puzzle, the lunar module, in Earth orbit, and then in lunar orbit. The stage was set. The next mission to fly to the moon would not be a dress rehearsal. It would be for the landing. The culmination of the decade-long quest was at hand. Chapter 9. The Eagle has landed. July 16, 1969. Kennedy Space Center. 1 million people have gathered on the beaches and causeways of Florida's coastline. They are here to witness the launch of Apollo 11. The destination is history. The crew is a study in contrasts. The commander, Neil Armstrong, a civilian test pilot, is quiet, reserved, and intensely focused. The lunar module pilot, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, an Air Force colonel with a doctorate from MIT, is brilliant, outspoken, and deeply passionate. The command module pilot, Michael Collins, also an Air Force officer, is witty, eloquent, and destined for the loneliest job in human history, to orbit the moon alone while his crewmates descend to the surface. At 9:32 a.m., the Saturn V rocket ignites. The launch is flawless. For 3 days they cross the quarter-million-mile gulf between worlds. Their journey is smooth, almost routine, a testament to the lessons learned on the missions that came before. On July 19th, Apollo 11 slips into lunar orbit. The next day, Armstrong and Aldrin crawl through the narrow tunnel connecting the command module Columbia to the lunar module Eagle. They power up the lander, check its systems, and undock from the mother ship. Michael Collins watches them go. "You guys take care," he says, as the strange, spindly craft pirouettes before his window. As the Eagle drifts away, Collins becomes the most isolated human being in the universe, his two companions receding into the distance, with only mission control for company. His solitude is absolute. The Eagle begins its powered descent. The journey to the surface is a 12-minute fall, controlled by the lander's main engine and a small primitive computer, with less processing power than a modern pocket calculator. Armstrong and Aldrin are focused, calling out data, monitoring the systems. Everything is going according to plan. And then, at 6,000 feet above the surface, the alarms begin. A shrill, insistent tone, a flashing light. The 1202 program alarm. They have never seen it in training. They do not know what it means. Aldrin's voice is sharp. Program alarm. It's a 1202, in Houston. Hearts stop. The mission is seconds from being aborted. But a young flight controller, Steve Bales, relying on his training and a last-minute simulation, recognizes the alarm. It means the computer is overloaded with data, but can be ignored. He makes the call that saves the mission. We'll go on that alarm. The alarm sounds again and again. But the descent continues. Through his window, Armstrong sees the landing site. The computer is taking them into a crater strewn with massive boulders. He makes the decision instantly. He takes manual control. His heart rate doubles. He is now flying the Eagle, using a hand controller to guide the thrusters, skimming over the crater, searching for a safe place to land. He is burning fuel at a terrifying rate. Aldrin's voice is a steady stream of data. A human instrument panel. 750 feet. 540 feet. In Houston, the voice of the CEBCOM, Charlie Duke, is the crew's only link to home, his tone deliberately calm, but the fuel status calls from another controller are anything but 60 seconds. The 60-second mark is the final decision point. Land now or abort. Armstrong keeps flying, searching. The lunar dust, kicked up by the engine, obscures his view. He is flying blind. 30 seconds. This is the point of no return. There is no longer enough fuel to abort safely. They will either land, or they will crash. The tension in mission control is unbearable. Men stare at their consoles, their bodies rigid. The world listens to the silence between the crackles of static. Armstrong sees a clear spot, smooth, level. He eases the Eagle down. Aldrin calls out the final moments. Drifting right, contact light. A small blue light illuminates on the console. A 3-foot-long probe hanging from one of the lander's footpads has touched the surface. Okay. Engine stop. Armstrong shuts down the descent engine. A sudden, profound silence envelops the cockpit. For a moment, there is only the sound of their own breathing. They are on the moon. After a few seconds to run through the post-landing checklist, Armstrong keys his microphone. His voice is steady, almost matter-of-fact, but the words he speaks will be remembered forever. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. In mission control, the tension breaks. Men who have held their breath for minutes erupt in cheers, applause, and tears. Gene Kranz, the stoic flight director, slaps his console, his face a mask of relief and triumph. Charlie Duke's voice, thick with emotion, replies from Houston. Roger, Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. For 6.5 hours, Armstrong and Aldrin prepare for the next historic step. They check out the Eagle's systems, eat a meal, and begin the laborious process of putting on their bulky spacesuits and life support backpacks. Finally, the moment arrives. Armstrong opens the hatch and begins to back out onto the small platform, the porch. A camera mounted on the Eagle sends grainy black and white images back to Earth. The world watches, mesmerized, as a ghostly figure in a white suit descends a short ladder. Armstrong reaches the bottom rung. He pauses. He plants his left foot onto the fine, powdery surface of the moon. And he speaks. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. For the next 2.5 hours, Armstrong and Aldrin explore the area around their landing site. They are like children in a new, wondrous playground. They test their mobility in the 1/6 gravity, taking loping, kangaroo-like hops across the surface. Aldrin describes the scene as one of magnificent desolation. They plant the American flag, a moment of potent symbolism. They take a phone call from the President of the United States, Richard Nixon. They set up a series of scientific experiments, collecting samples of lunar rock and soil that will revolutionize our understanding of the solar system. They are explorers, scientists, and tourists, all at once. And 60 miles above them, Michael Collins orbits alone in the Columbia, a solitary sentinel. Each time he passes over the far side of the moon, he is utterly alone, cut off from all human contact. He writes in his log, "I am alone now, truly alone and absolutely isolated from any known life. I am it." Yet he feels not fear, but a sense of exultation, of pride in what they have accomplished. Their time on the surface ends all too quickly. They climb back into the Eagle, seal the hatch, and prepare for the most critical part of the mission after the landing, the ascent. If the single ascent engine fails to fire, there is no backup. There is no rescue. They will be stranded forever. But the engine fires perfectly. The Eagle's ascent stage lifts off in a silent shower of debris, leaving the descent stage behind as a permanent monument at Tranquility Base. They rendezvous and dock with Collins in the Columbia. The three explorers are reunited. Their journey home is one of quiet satisfaction and reflection. On July 24th, the Columbia streaks back into Earth's atmosphere, a man-made meteor, and splashes down in the Pacific Ocean. The goal set by a fallen president 8 years earlier has been met. The race has been won. America had done the impossible. Chapter 10. One Giant Leap. The splashdown of Apollo 11 in the Pacific Ocean was not an ending, but a beginning. It marked the dawn of a new human consciousness. For a brief, shining moment, the conflicts and divisions of Earth seemed to melt away, replaced by a shared sense of awe and achievement. The world celebrated as one. Newspapers in every language, from Paris to Tokyo, ran banner headlines proclaiming the triumph. In Moscow, the official reaction was muted, but ordinary citizens shared in the wonder. In homes, bars, and public squares around the globe, strangers embraced, united by the knowledge that humanity had slipped the bonds of its home world. The three astronauts, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, returned as global heroes, avatars of a new age of exploration. After a period of quarantine to ensure they carried no lunar pathogens, they embarked on a world tour, visiting 24 countries in 45 days. They were greeted by massive, cheering crowds, a reception usually reserved for royalty or rock stars. They were living symbols of what humanity could achieve when it dared to dream on a grand scale. The ticker-tape parades in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles were among the largest in history, a cathartic, joyous release for a nation that had invested so much of its treasure, talent, and hope in the quest. The victory in the space race was complete and undeniable. The Soviet Union, which had once seemed so dominant, fell silent. Their secret moon program was in ruins, their Nen-1 rocket a smoldering wreck. They would pivot their focus to long-duration space stations in Earth orbit, ceding the moon to the Americans. But Apollo was not just about planting a flag, it was a scientific bonanza. The 47.5 pounds of rocks and soil brought back by the Apollo 11 crew, and the hundreds of pounds returned by subsequent missions, were a Rosetta Stone for understanding the origins of the Earth-Moon system. They revealed the moon to be an ancient, geologically dead world, heavily cratered and formed from a cataclysmic impact with the early Earth. These lunar samples, carefully preserved at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, are still being studied by scientists today, yielding new discoveries decades later. The Apollo program continued. 5 more missions would successfully land on the moon. Apollo 12 overcame a lightning strike at launch to make a pinpoint landing next to an old robotic probe. Apollo 14 explored the Fraff-Moreau Highlands. Apollo 15, 16, and 17 were even more ambitious, featuring the Lunar Roving Vehicle, an electric car that allowed astronauts to explore miles from their lander, conducting complex geological surveys. These later missions, while scientifically more productive than the first landing, never captured the public's imagination in the same way. The world had moved on. The race was over. The sense of urgency that had fueled the program began to fade. The cost of the Apollo program, over $25 billion, more than $150 billion in today's money, became harder to justify. The Vietnam War was raging. America was grappling with deep social and economic problems at home. The political will to continue funding such an expensive enterprise evaporated. In December 1972, Eugene Cernan, the commander of Apollo 17, became the last man to walk on the moon. As he prepared to climb the ladder of his lunar module for the final time, he spoke a simple epitaph for the program. As we leave the moon at Taurus Littrow, we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind. He then stepped off the surface. No human has been back since. The legacy of Apollo is complex and far-reaching. It was born of Cold War conflict, a massive expenditure driven by fear and national pride, but it produced a moment of global unity. It was a triumph of engineering and management, a demonstration of what a focused, well-funded national effort could achieve. The technological spin-offs from the program are woven into the fabric of modern life, from microelectronics and computing to medical imaging and materials science. But perhaps its most enduring legacy is philosophical. The image of the Earth from space, particularly the Earthrise and blue marble photographs, fundamentally shifted human perspective. It showed us our planet as it truly is, a small, beautiful, interconnected system, a fragile oasis in the vast, indifferent darkness. It fostered a sense of shared destiny and responsibility. The space race, which began with the fearful beep of a Soviet satellite, ended with a message of peace and a photograph of home. It was a contest between two superpowers, but the ultimate winner was humanity itself. The launch pads at Cape Kennedy, where the Saturn V rockets once thundered into the sky, are now quiet, memorials to a bygone era. The giant vehicle assembly building stands as a cathedral to a past faith. The computers in mission control which guided men across the void have been replaced by museum exhibits. The generation that achieved Apollo is passing into history, but the footprints remain. On the still, silent surface of the moon, at 6 locations in the seas and highlands, the descent stages of the lunar modules still stand, silent monuments. The flags, bleached white by decades of unfiltered sunlight, may still be there, and the footprints of 12 human beings remain perfectly preserved in the airless dust, where they will likely remain for millions of years. They are a testament to a time when a nation and the world looked up and reached for the heavens, not in fear, but in wonder. They are a reminder of what we did, and a quiet, persistent question about what we will do next.